They say the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, and when it comes to money, the richest people in the world often live by the same rule. Picture this: a millionaire walks into a restaurant. He doesn't demand attention. He doesn't sit down in designer clothes or loudly brag about his business wins. He orders his food quietly, tips generously, and leaves without anyone realizing they were just sitting next to someone who could buy the entire building. Now here's the twist. He could have walked in wearing a gold watch that cost more than the restaurant's annual rent. He could have arrived in a car so loud people would have turned their heads before he even stepped inside. He could have made a show of wealth so big no one would forget it, but he didn't. He chose quiet, and that's where the real secret begins. See, most people think the rich are rich because of the big gestures, the mansions, the jets, the yachts. But if you peel back the curtain, if you look closer at how real wealth is actually built and protected, you'll find something surprising. The richest people are often defined not by what they show, but by what they hide. They live differently, think differently, move differently, not loudly, not with fireworks, but quietly. And in those quiet choices are the habits, the philosophies, the small, invisible things that separate financial freedom from financial struggle. So today, I want to take you inside those quiet things, not the flashy headlines, not the Instagram lifestyles, but the 7 subtle, almost hidden things the rich do every day that the poor don't. And I promise you, once you see these, you'll never look at wealth the same way again. Let's start with a story. There was a man in Omaha, Nebraska. He wore old sweaters, drank Coca-Cola, loved cheeseburgers. To most people, he looked like your average grandfather living a quiet, modest life. But that man was Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest individuals alive. And here's what's fascinating. Buffett has access to everything: jets, luxury cars, penthouses in Manhattan. Yet he still lives in the same modest house he bought in 1958. Still drives practical cars, still avoids extravagance. Why? Because wealth for him isn't about noise, it's about peace, security, freedom. And here's where the contrast cuts deep. While most people chase the image of success, spending money to look rich, Buffett quietly spent decades doing what actually makes you rich: saving, investing, compounding. That's the pattern you'll see over and over again if you look closely at the habits of the wealthy. Quiet discipline versus loud indulgence, long-term thinking versus short-term flashes, invisible preparation versus visible consumption. But let me take you deeper. A friend once told me a story about his grandfather. He worked a regular job his whole life, never made headlines, never owned anything flashy, but he had a quiet ritual. Every single month, without fail, he set aside money before spending on anything else. Nobody noticed, nobody congratulated him. But decades later, when the family discovered he had quietly built a small fortune in investments, everyone was stunned. The poor see saving as a sacrifice. The rich see saving as strategy. That's the first quiet thing: the refusal to spend for applause and the commitment to invest for freedom. Now let's pull the curtain back on another quiet truth. Have you ever noticed how some of the richest people are also the most boring with their routines? You'd expect chaos, you'd expect adventure. Instead, you see discipline, rituals, systems. Take Bill Gates. When asked about success, he once said, "Most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10. That's a quiet habit. The patience to play the long game while everyone else chases quick wins. Here's the contrast. The poor chase excitement, lottery tickets, flashy opportunities, the next big thing. The rich repeat the boring, consistent behaviors that don't look impressive day to day, but transform everything over decades. It's like planting trees. You don't see much at first, just dirt, water, sunlight, patience. But fast forward years later, and you're standing in a forest. The forest grows in silence, and so does wealth. But there's another layer, and this one's almost invisible unless you pay attention. Rich people protect their attention the way most people try to protect their money. They guard what goes into their minds, who gets access to their time, and where their focus goes. It's quiet. You don't see it on social media. Nobody brags about saying no to distractions, but it's one of the most powerful differences between those who build freedom and those who stay trapped. Think about it. The poor are pulled in every direction: latest trends, constant noise, endless scrolling. The rich quietly are saying no, cutting out the noise, focusing on what compounds. It's discipline that happens in silence, and because nobody notices it, nobody copies it. Now here's where things get emotional. The poor often live with constant urgency. Bills piling up, stress over rent, payday loans. Every dollar feels like it's on fire, and the only thing that matters is putting the flames out. The rich live in the opposite space. Their money works for them, their habits compound. They live with quiet calm instead of loud chaos. Imagine the difference between standing in the middle of a storm and sitting on a quiet porch, watching the rain from a safe distance. That's the contrast. And here's the catch, the difference doesn't start with millions of dollars. It starts with small, quiet decisions repeated long enough to change the outcome. Choosing to drive the old car a little longer, choosing to make the coffee at home instead of swiping the card every morning, choosing to buy assets before status. They seem small, almost invisible, but add them up over years, that's the foundation of wealth. Let me give you another picture. There's a woman named Groner. She worked as a secretary for most of her life, never married, never sought luxury. She lived in a tiny one-bedroom cottage. To anyone passing by, she looked ordinary, almost poor. But when she died at the age of 100, she left behind $7 million. $7 million. Built from quiet investing, consistent saving, and never chasing appearances. No one saw it coming. Because the quiet things don't show until decades later. And here's the contrast, how many people do we see today with flashy cars, expensive clothes, Instagram-perfect lifestyles, yet behind the curtain, they're drowning in debt. The difference isn't money, it's mindset. It's what you do in the quiet moments when nobody's watching. But let me share something that might sting a little. Most people fail to build wealth not because they don't know what to do, but because they can't stand the silence. They want excitement, they want the quick reward, they want the applause. The rich, they learn to fall in love with the quiet, the boring routine, the unglamorous patience, the years of compounding that don't impress anyone until suddenly, they do. It's the difference between playing checkers and playing chess. One is loud, fast, over in minutes. The other is quiet, strategic, and one decades into the future. So, here we are. You've probably noticed by now that these 7 quiet things aren't flashy tricks. They're not shortcuts. They're habits, philosophies, ways of moving through the world that most people overlook because they don't look exciting enough to post online. But that's exactly why they work, because wealth doesn't grow in noise. It grows in silence. Not in the dramatic moments, but in the invisible ones. Not in what people cheer for, but in what nobody notices. And that's the hidden difference between the rich and the poor. He didn't say much, just folded the receipt, slipped it into his pocket and drove off in his old sedan. That small quiet action, it spoke louder than any speech about money ever could. Because here's the truth, the rich don't just earn differently, they think differently. And the difference isn't always loud. In fact, most of the time, it's almost invisible. Let me take you into one of those invisible moments. A friend of mine once worked in a luxury hotel. You'd expect the wealthiest guests to be the ones asking for champagne at breakfast, or demanding suites with golden bathtubs. But guess who he noticed paid the biggest deposits, stayed the longest, and tipped the most generously? The people who blended in, no designer luggage, no dramatic entrances, just quiet. They moved differently, like they didn't need anyone to know. Why? Because the poor often chase appearance while the rich quietly build substance. Think about it. Flashiness is usually a performance, expensive cars, designer sneakers, stacks of cash on Instagram. It's noise. Noise to prove you have something, even if behind the curtain you don't. But silence? Silence is a different kind of flex. It's the confidence of someone who knows they're secure enough not to shout. And here's where the contrast gets sharp. One man spends his bonus on a brand new watch. He posts it online, gets a flood of likes, feels on top of the world, for a moment. But the watch doesn't pay him back. Another man takes that same bonus, buys shares in a boring company nobody talks about, and tucks the certificate away in a drawer. No one notices, no likes. But 5 years later, that quiet choice has multiplied itself into freedom. This is the kind of wealth building that happens when no one's watching. But let's get deeper, because there's something even more fascinating. The poor are often taught that money is something you spend, a tool to enjoy, to show, to release. While the rich, they're taught something completely different. Money is a seed. Seeds don't look impressive when you plant them. They're tiny, boring, buried in dirt. You can't post a seed on Instagram and expect anyone to care, but wait long enough, and it grows into a tree that feeds you for a lifetime. And this right here, is one of the quietest, yet most powerful things the rich do differently. They see beyond the moment. They let seeds grow, but that patience comes at a cost. Because here's the emotional clash. The poor often crave the relief of now. The buzz of dopamine from a new gadget, the short-lived thrill of a shiny car. The rich crave something else, the calm of tomorrow, the quiet safety net, the discipline that whispers, not yet. Let me tell you about a man named Ronald Reed. If you've never heard his name, that's the point. He was a janitor, drove an old used car, fixed his own clothes with safety pins. Nobody gave him a second look. And when he passed away at age 92, the town gasped. Why? Because this quiet man, invisible to almost everyone, had quietly built an $8 million fortune through decades of disciplined investing. No noise, no show, just quiet seeds planted again and again. Now let's pause here. Imagine you're in his shoes. You've worked hard, saved, invested, and suddenly you're sitting on wealth that could turn heads. Wouldn't you want to shout it, buy the mansion, prove them wrong? That's the trap. And it's exactly what the poor often fall into, turning wealth into a spotlight instead of a shield. But the rich? They know the shield is the real prize. Privacy, security, quiet freedom. And here's another paradox. Sometimes the loudest poverty isn't financial, it's emotional. The need to be seen, to be validated, to prove. That hunger can chain you tighter than debt. The rich don't escape this by magic. They escape it by choice, by choosing silence when they could choose noise, by choosing restraint when they could choose indulgence, by choosing the long game when the short game is screaming at them. But the story doesn't end there. Because there's one more twist. The rich don't just stay quiet with their money, they stay quiet with their time. Look closely at their calendars. You'll see long stretches of blocked-out hours labeled with one simple word: nothing. Not because they're lazy, but because they guard their focus like treasure. The poor often fill their days with noise, scrolling, distractions, endless chasing. The rich subtract. They create space, quiet space. And in that silence, that's where the real work happens. The reading, the thinking, the planning, the conversations no one else hears. Remember Warren Buffett? He famously spends 80% of his day reading and thinking. Not talking, not performing, not rushing, just quietly feeding his mind. And that quiet habit compounds, just like money does. But let me throw you a curveball. Quiet isn't easy. It feels uncomfortable at first. Silence feels empty when you're used to filling it with noise. Driving an old car feels awkward when your neighbor just bought a shiny new one. Saying no to dinner out feels painful when everyone else is posting their food online. That tension? That's the battlefield. That's where rich and poor habits split. One side chooses comfort now, the other side chooses discomfort now, comfort later. One side seeks noise, the other side seeks quiet. And here's where the cliffhanger lands. What you do in those silent, unseen moments writes the story of your future. But let's keep going, because there's one last layer most people never notice. When the rich practice these quiet things, old cars, simple clothes, guarded time, it isn't just about saving money. It's about shaping identity. They're telling themselves a story. I don't need to prove myself with noise. My worth doesn't depend on your attention. That story is freedom. And the poor? Often they're trapped in the opposite story. If no one sees it, it didn't happen. If I don't show it, it's not real. That story is a cage. So let me bring you into a simple metaphor. Imagine two houses. One is built with glass walls, shiny, flashy. Everyone can see inside. It looks beautiful, but it's fragile. One stone and it cracks. The other house? It's modest. Bricks, plain paint. No one stops to admire it. But inside it's built like a fortress. Warm, solid, unshakable. That's the quiet difference. And here's the whisper that should stay with you. Wealth doesn't always look like wealth. Sometimes it looks boring. Sometimes it looks invisible. Sometimes it looks like a man in an old car driving to the same diner every morning. But behind that quiet, there's power. Because the truth is, real wealth doesn't shout, it whispers. Remember how we started? With that quiet figure slipping a receipt into his pocket, driving away in an old sedan? No headlines, no applause, just an ordinary action most people would overlook. That's the thread running through all of this. The richest habits aren't loud, they're almost invisible, and that's why they're so powerful. Because here's the big truth, wealth isn't built in fireworks, it's built in whispers. In the decision to drive the old car instead of chasing the new. In the moment you choose to plant a seed instead of eating it. In the discipline to say not yet when everything around you is screaming right now. And these choices, they don't feel like much in the moment. They feel small, boring, easy to dismiss, but they compound, they stack. And over years they shape a life so steady, so free, that it looks almost magical from the outside. But there's no magic, just quiet. Here's the philosophy to carry with you. The poor often chase noise because noise feels good in the moment. The rich seek quiet because quiet lasts. And maybe, just maybe, that's the invitation for you. To find power in the quiet moments of your own life. to notice the places where you can subtract instead of add, to trust that what feels invisible today might be the very thing that makes you unshakable tomorrow. So when you see someone in an old car, wearing simple clothes, blending into the background, don't be fooled. That quiet could be hiding more strength than the flashiest noise ever could. And if this resonated with you, stay on this journey with me. Hit subscribe, share this with someone who needs the reminder, and keep walking this quiet path toward freedom. Because sometimes the richest life isn't the one that shouts, it's the one that whispers, softly, steadily, patiently, until one day you realize you're free.